Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 38 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, as always, by, you've guessed it, the man who's moved a foot to the left, according to his little speech bubble today, lead cloud engineer to the left, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
I feel all out of sorts because I've moved a foot to the left.
Would that be a foot to the right as far as viewers are concerned, or if you've moved a foot to the right, you've already translated that?
I mean, I have physically moved left, so I don't know if my video is mirrored or not. I don't know. I don't know. You probably can't really tell the difference. Just like the cat tree isn't there anymore, and I've kind of moved this way.
Yeah, so that's to the right then, as far as the viewers are concerned. So, but it's your left, but yeah, to the right.
Clowns to the left, jokers to the right.
Yeah, I do apologise to anyone who only listens to the podcast because this will make no sense to you whatsoever.
No, but you're missing out. You should watch. It's better to watch. You're missing out. But you pays your money, you make your choice. No, I rejigged the office a little bit at the weekend. I was having a bit of a flump, and I rejigged the office a little bit. For those in the UK, I was not having the confectionery a flump. I think it's the weather's being naff, and my brain was just sort of screaming. So I've moved everything to the left a little bit. My sofa swapped back round again. I've got more furniture in here, and now I've got a little display area for various karate kit and belts and what have you. So now I need to go and buy one of those belt display things because you can get them. They're great.
I hope we're going to be featuring that on a future episode. It sounds great. I have to say that when you said the word flump, my mind did go straight to pink and yellow marshmallows. But anyway, moving on from karate and confectionery, some lovely alliteration there. Let's introduce
episode title right there.
Let's introduce today's returning guest. We're very pleased to have fellow AWS community builder back on the podcast for a second time, Luis Valdivia. How are you doing today, Luis?
Yes, I'm doing great. It's my pleasure to be here as a second time. And because you spoiled me last year that I was getting a backpack, I now have the backpack, and you have spoiled me about the Serverless swag that I'm going to receive next year.
Yep, because Luis is Luis is 1 year behind us in the community builder program, so we can show him what lovely swag that we've got for what he's got to look forward to in his next year in the program. But for the listeners who did not hear the previous episode with you on, Luis, tell us a little bit about what you do for a living, what you do in the AWS community, etc.
Yes, I work as a CTO here in a software factory called Plus One. I'm a backend developer. I like PHP and MySQL databases, but these years I'm focusing right now in all the AWS media services like Media Convert, Media Live, Media Tailor. I'm focusing on creating solutions using all that technologies and teaching people that these services exist, because if you go to a seminar or a small talk, all people talk about RDS, EC2, serverless, and all the fancy things, but they don't teach you about these cool services that you can deploy a Netflix application, a OTT application, or maybe a TUI application. So
I talk about Media Convert in my talk, but very, very briefly. And there's lots of serverless in there.
There's a lot of services that you don't. For example, I'm a very big fan of WWE. This is John Cena. And
no, there's nothing there. I can't say it.
Yes, here.
No, you missed the John Cena can't. You missed the reference.
I definitely missed the reference.
For example, nowadays you have Netflix that is showing pay-per-view events on live. So I teach people that behind all this technology, you can deploy it in minutes or maybe in hours. Because if you want to deploy a live event, you will have to know about WOWs or any other crazy commands that you can learn, but there is a big curve of learning.
Yeah, I think people forget that when they switch on their TV and stream a movie or a series or a live event, there's an awful lot of technology infrastructure and software behind that to make that happen. I always use the example of Netflix when I'm trying to explain what AWS is to people, because most people have never heard of AWS if they don't work in the industry. And I use the example of, well, do you have Netflix? To which 99% of people say yes. Obviously, every time you stream a film or a program from Netflix, you're downloading data from AWS. Simple as that.
But Netflix is AWS's biggest non-Amazon customer, or in that ballpark, I think.
Yes, it's the biggest one.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anyway, we're not here to talk about streaming media, or sadly, we're not here to talk about Elemental Media Converter or any of those services either. We're here to talk about serverless and all that other stuff that people always talk about, just because that's what's in the news. So as regular listeners will know, once a week I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John sometimes remembers to pick a selection of the articles and share it with our guest ahead of the weekend, so they have plenty of time to read the articles. Unfortunately, this week, John did forget. I think it's the first time in 130 odd episodes that you have forgotten.
No, it's the second. It's the second time.
You should have just accepted
the first time as well.
You could have just accepted that it was the first time, but
no,
thank you.
It's the first, because poor Ed, I was on holiday and you were away, and just neither of us remembered to tell someone else to do it.
Well, there we go. Anyway, we have managed to get a selection of articles in front of Luis before recording the podcast, so we've all had an opportunity to quickly review those. And the first of those articles is an article from the AWS News blog about the amazing news that there is now yet another way to run containers on AWS. I think, as I mentioned in my news roundup last week, Corey Quinn wrote a blog post back in 2023 entitled 17 Ways to Run Containers on AWS. So I'm not sure if this is the 18th way to run containers on AWS, or if there have been more ways introduced since Corey's blog post
about
back
the
in
52nd.
2023. So, okay. Well, his blog post said 17, so if this is a 52nd,
he did
that would mean
two follow-ups on that. He did 17 Ways Part 2 and 17 Ways Part 3.
Okay, so I missed the sequels, but anyway, we digress, as we often do. But this is an article from the AWS News blog all about another way to run containers on AWS. And this is ECS managed instances for containerized applications. And I think we spoke about an article recently on the podcast, which was comparing when to use ECS versus Fargate, and we said that's kind of a bit pointless. This actually blurs the lines a little bit more, I think, now, is when to use Fargate versus ECS managed instances, I guess. So what are your thoughts, John, on the ECS managed instances, the 51st or the 18th or the umpteenth way to run containers?
709th, I think. So now this is actually the fourth way of providing compute to ECS. So we could go with that, because that's true. Because you can do unmanaged EC2, in which case you are responsible for managing the EC2 and providing it to the ECS service, which is the original way of doing it, right? Which was, you'd have your ASGs, or you'd have static instances. Realistically, you'd want a scaling group, and you'd have to hook all of these things together so that I keep doing it. So that ECS is aware of where the instances are and they kind of register, but you're responsible for both ends of that equation. That's still a thing. You can still do that. And that, I think, is still the cheapest way of providing compute to ECS, because there's no management layer. You're doing all of it yourself. Fine. And if that's what you're doing today, you don't need to move. Just keep on as you're doing, because it's fine. It will still work. And it's the cheapest way of doing it. Brilliant.
Well, it is if you're managing it effectively.
Exactly. Yes. Using things like Spot instances and what have you to provide compute. And before anyone comes at me saying, oh, you shouldn't be using Spot for production, a containerized application is the perfect candidate for Spot instances, because they can largely tolerate interruptions moving around. If you've got long running things in containers, look at your container definitions, I would suggest, if they can't be kind of moved within a couple of minutes. It's a separate problem. That's option one, still viable. Option two was then Fargate, in which case you don't have anything to worry about. They just look after it for you. Just give me a container, run, please, off you pop. And you don't have to think about it. And that's great, because you pay, I think it's about 40% more or something. It's quite a bit more. But there's no thinking. There's no engineering time. And honestly, your engineers spending time getting these things working, optimized, patching instances, cycling it, all that jazz, their time is better spent doing something else. And unless you've got very underpaid engineers, your engineers are more expensive than your cloud bill. They just kind of are. Sorry, they just are. Right? So next. Then you had Fargate Spot, which is kind of like a subtype of Fargate, but I'm giving it its own category, which for me blurred the line between unmanaged EC2 using Spot instances and then Fargate with Spot, so you could take advantage of Spot pricing somehow. I still don't really understand how that works. And honestly, I'm going to have to write a blog post about all of these just to force me to go and do the research, I think, and for CB renewal for year 4, because obviously talking 3-4 times at major conferences and podcasting and all the rest of it isn't enough content for me, apparently. And now we have, on top of that, managed EC2, which is weird. It's kind of what you should be doing for your unmanaged EC2 instances with Fargate. I keep doing it with ECS, right? What you should be doing is you should be using a scaling group. You should be optimizing for availability rather than saying, I only want C5 larges. You should say, give me anything that matches between 2 and 16 CPU, please, in this region. And I don't really care about the family. Just make sure it's the right CPU type. Thanks very much. And honestly, with containers, you could probably get away with just swapping between Graviton and x86. Because there's translation layers and things that I think get applied automatically, but don't quote me on that. So I would stay in Graviton or out of Graviton just to make your life easier. But you now don't really have to be very specific. Cool. And this is what managed instances are doing for you. You say, I want EC2s, please, but I want you to look after them. Okay, cool. So line is now really, really, really blurry. I can't see a cost for this. I don't know if the article calls it out or if I've just missed it because, as Carl said, I've only had this article in front of me for an hour and I don't read them anyway. But I don't think there's a cost for doing this, or if there is, it's very, very low. So this is it's yet another headache to get your head round for the exam more than anything else, because whilst I see what this is solving, this is I want to use EC2s so I can go and get on the EC2s. I want you to look after them for me. That's a really nice use case, and it lets you do things like Docker image layer caching, which you can't do with Fargate. So that's another kind of nice feature. But it's just the water is just getting muddier and muddier now.
So there is a pricing model for it. You pay a management fee for the service. I'm looking at the pricing now. It looks like it's not available in all regions yet because I can only choose the Ireland region in Europe and not the London region. But I think there's like a management fee per instance type. So it depends on the type of instance you're managing. It looks like they're laying it out, for a C5.12x large, the price per hour to have it managed by ECS managed instances is 27 cents, nearly 28 cents. So it's per instance, but it depends on the instance type that you've got.
So that definitely biases you into having the larger instances. So if you can get away with having a few instances rather than lots of little ones, it's going to be cheaper if you use this model, which feels iffy to me, because the whole point of containers is you use the smallest logical unit of compute that you can possibly get away with, and things are moving around constantly. And then that's the way I view it at any rate. So I don't know how I feel about that. But I like this as a feature generally because it gives you more options, and the lack of layer caching in Fargate is a big sticking point for me.
Large is the smallest, as it were, on the price list, going up to X large and metal. Well, up to 12X large and metal. So yeah, it's definitely preferring the larger instances there. But Luis, what are your thoughts on this? Yet another way to run containers on AWS.
I think this is a huge step towards simplifying container operations because you have like a hybrid. You don't have to worry about patching, health checks, or anything, but you can choose the type family, the capacity, and networking. And Fargate is like the steering wheel. Fargate will control that, but you will work with the EC2. And it also, I think it goes like, it aligns with AWS move toward managed autonomy. You get the flexibility and you can reduce the cost because Fargate is a little expensive. But it's like AWS is saying us that you can focus on the container. We will take care of the rest. That is, for example, a dream for a DevOps team because many programmers, many developers, and many companies doesn't have a DevOps team, so they don't have to worry about create these CloudFormation templates or the other one I don't remember. CloudFormation is the CloudFormation and the other scripts. So I think it's a good method. Maybe in the future it will be the default ECS deploying method. But the thing that I'm worried is that there is no specific cost because it only says a management fee, and you have to read that carefully because there are some services that you don't know, but it costs more than others.
Yeah, I guess, it allows you to specify exactly what you're going to be running your containers on, whereas Fargate doesn't. It's just magic that happens under the hood. So, if you want to specify the instance types that your containers are running on, then this would give you the option to do that, I guess. But why would you want to do that? Any idea why you want to do that, John? You need to write the blog post, don't you?
Yeah, because it'll force me to do the research into the full kind of options. It'll force me to do that. I can't think of a reason why you'd want to run a specific instance type. Instance families, sure, because ARM versus not ARM, or GPU instances or whatever. So that kind of makes sense. But why you'd want to run on a T3A large versus an X large, no idea. As I say, the only thing that really comes to mind for me is having actual instances, even if you don't have to look after them, but having actual instances is useful because you start getting access to host features that Docker gives you, things like caching, which you don't get with Fargate. That's kind of the only thing that I would lean on this for.
Well, there we go. Another way to run containers on AWS, and watch this space for a blog post soon on how to choose one over the other, which is the right way for you to run your containers on AWS.
Not that soon. Not that soon.
Well, I didn't specify how soon was, but just watch this space. Don't blink. While waiting for this blog post. But let's move along to our second article for this week. And this is an article about serverless, and it's written by an AWS hero, Evandro Perez. And the title is a question: is serverless expensive at scale? And the second part of the title is the answer: only if you're using it wrong. So it's often a criticism levied at serverless functions, lambdas, and so on and so forth. That they're great when you're starting off small, but actually once you start to really scale up to kind of enterprise scale, it starts to become more expensive than the alternatives, which of course would be running similar things in containers, as we've just discussed. But it seems that Evandro is trying to dispel the myth that serverless is expensive at scale, and you should be running your app in containers when you get to that scale. So, John, thoughts on this? Because I know you're obviously a serverless community builder, so I'm sure you're probably leaning towards Evandro's opinion on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. He's been a bit confrontational about the kind of title. It's a bit kind of an angry title, which it reminds me of my iPhone doesn't work when I hold it like this, so don't do that then. This sort of response, like, well, okay, it's not the best for getting people on side. It's expensive. You've done it wrong. You sort of, but it's not a helpful way of engaging with people. But it's an article, and it's an article, and it's designed to get people kind of to react and respond. It's exactly what we're doing. So, well done, Evandro. Title's done its job. I largely agree with him. Largely, the first, he goes through a number of biases rather than kind of specifically talking about what the actual problems are. And he goes through a number of biases. The first one is, well, serverless is only Lambda. Lambda is important, blah, 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 but we can't reduce serverless to this service alone. Yeah, fine, cool. Serverless is more than Lambda. Don't start me on things that have called themselves serverless but aren't. Like Aurora Serverless V2 up until reasonably recently wasn't serverless because it didn't scale to zero. And for me, that's fundamental. Yeah. If you have to pay for something to exist, it's not serverless, it's a managed. It's not serverless, it's a managed service. Like a NAT gateway, there is a server behind it, but you pay for it to exist, so it's not serverless, it's a managed service. It's a managed server, as far as I'm concerned. That's not serverless. Cool. The first one is, Lambda is important, but serverless is more than that. 100%. Completely agree with that. There's lots of other things that are serverless. My favorite serverless service actually being step functions, as I've gone on record many times saying that I like a step function. And I'm going to keep saying it as many times as I can so I can reference myself saying it in other things. Nice bit of Ouroboros reporting there. The next one is containers are not serverless. Well, containers, okay, fine. No, containers are sort of semi-serverless because they're designed to work with servers in certain places, right? And in true serverless, you don't necessarily have to care about anything about the host that you're running on, but that's not strictly true with containers because you can't run, unless something's changed since the last time I looked, you can't run Windows on Linux and Linux on Windows. They just, because of kernel bits and pieces, so that's sort of semi-serverless. But again, and then he talks about various other things. SQS, that's serverless. S3, that's serverless. Yep, all of these things are true. And then talking about serverless being more than just compute and so on, and that's all very true. That's all very true, and I completely agree with all of that. What I agree more though is serverless isn't the problem, your architecture is the problem. And the example that kind of set the world on fire a little bit within this space was when the Prime Video team moved one part of one microservice back to servers instead of being serverless. And to be very clear, this kind of set the whole world alight on this one, because it was, oh, serverless is dead. Even Amazon aren't doing it anymore. And I'm sorry, no, that was the video streaming quality test team. One very specific team moved one part of one service back to servers because they kind of got it wrong. So yeah, he's not wrong. It's entirely architecture and it's entirely use case. And there are some places where serverless is wrong. I would argue that most databases are better off being fixed capacity, even if they're not used overnight, because people are just much more comfortable with that. And to a great extent, what a lot of your architecture needs to do is be comfortable and easy to understand for the people operating it. So there's a lot going on in this article. It's a bit ranty at points, but I like it and I like the rant. So go read it. It's great.
What are your thoughts on this, Luis?
I agree with the phrase, bad architecture is the problem. Because when you go to serverless, you try to think that every micro task should be a Lambda. And that is a problem because you can cause unnecessary invocation, state management, and latency. So I see a lot of things that say, we should use functions instead of servers. And when the bills arrive at the end of the month, you said, oh, we need to return to a monolith architecture, like John said in the Prime Video team that set the world on fire because they returned to a monolithic instead of using serverless. What I think is that serverless, you should change your mindset. You should think about event-driven systems, asynchronous flows, and paper execution efficiency. Not just think, I will run this function in the cloud. So it's not my problem. For example, if you use one Lambda per database query, you are doing it wrong. You should use Lambdas to coordinate larger batches or microservices. You can scale infinitely and pay nothing about the decision. So I agree with the phrase that is just saying that architecture is a bad problem, because you can have a monolith application, but you have an X large instance, a database that is running 24/7, and you are spending a lot of money. So the problem is not if you are using serverless, monolithic microservices, your architecture is wrong, and you think that you can do whatever you want in the cloud. But the cloud is elasticity, and you have to think that is an efficient way.
It was always the case, though, wasn't it, that the cloud was, everyone thinks, oh, it's more eco-friendly, we'll put it in the cloud. And then the response to it's not working properly is, we'll just throw more servers at it, we'll throw more power at it. And serverless has somewhat amplified that problem because it's very easy to just turn the dial. But yeah, bad architecture is always going to be bad architecture, and that's your primary problem.
Yeah, throwing infrastructure at a problem is a great way to mask bad code or bad architecture, and we do spend a fair bit of our time doing that for people on occasion. But yeah, that's
make a problem go away, turn it up.
Yeah, in the short term.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there we go. Yeah, serverless doesn't have to be expensive at scale if you're doing it right. On that note, let's move along to our third article for this week and back into the world of AI, of course. So it's an article on the AWS News blog that the latest Anthropic Claude Sonnet 4.5 model is now available in Amazon Bedrock. And the article describes it as Anthropic's most intelligent model, best for coding and complex agents. This is by our friend Mateus Guimarães. Actually, I hadn't noticed that earlier when we looked at it. So I'll come to you first on this one, Luis. What are your thoughts on this? Are you doing much in the world of coding, AI-assisted coding, etc.?
Yes, I'm using that, and I think this is a massive strategic move for AWS, because they are turning Bedrock like in a hub of enterprise-grade AI, with all the security, compliance, and monitoring AWS for this model. For example, you can create an AI that reads Cloud Batch log, then diagnose incidents and create remediation steps, all with your VPC using your AI roles. So I think that is where it's heading. And it also shows how AWS is not competing on the hype. Instead of that, he is competing of integration. Bedrock doesn't need to be the flashiest. It just needs to be the safest, most connected, and the most deployable platform for real-world AI. So I think if you are building enterprise copilots or AI assistants that touch real infrastructure, this is the real win because AWS is giving you cloud is the brain, and the Bedrock is the body. So it can be fully connected, secure, and production ready.
Cool. John, thoughts on this?
I'm just trying to find if it's following the same annoyance that I have with model rollouts generally, and I might just shout at Matthias. Because the biggest annoyance I have with model rollouts is it's there, visit documentation. The biggest annoyance I have with model rollouts is they're inconsistent from one region to the next. Now, I've been actually using since I won my coin, which is just slightly out of reach on my desk over there. I'm very proud of myself. I never win anything. But
is it about a foot to the left?
It's slightly more than that because it's now on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side of where I keep my trinkets and things on my desk. So it's even slightly more than that. The biggest annoyance that I have with the model rollouts is the region inconsistency, right? Because Bedrock didn't come to all regions evenly. And I understand this to an extent. I do, right? Because different regions have different data center requirements, different power requirements, different ability to get new kit in, so on and so on and so on. Fine. And then the models have come really sporadically to various regions as well. And it doesn't say in Matthias's article because, to be honest, at this point, there's so many of them. I don't think it's unreasonable to say, if you want to know where you can actually go and use it, and go look at the docs because that'll be kept up to date longer than this blog post will, which is kind of fair. But that's kind of my biggest gripe with any of these is they don't come to new regions evenly. And I understand that, but you end up with this tier 1, 2, 3 for regions. And I just think that's not quite right. In terms of the change, though, I like this. I like new models being available. I like them being in Bedrock because, again, as Louis sort of said, you don't have to worry about going out to external providers and things. It's all there, which is great for your security model. It's all within AWS. And because AWS Bedrock is running it, none of your data is used for training. So it doesn't get sent back to the model providers. The model providers never see your data because Amazon themselves are running it in their own spaces. And that's great. And I like this very much. I mean, I've been playing with Sonnet 4 today. Doing actually quite a bit of vibe coding for some work that I've been doing, and it's great. It works really well. It got me there really quickly. It had a bit of a paddy about something that wasn't particularly well documented within the AWS documentation, so I can't blame the AI for that. The docs weren't great, but once I read it, worked it out, made that little fix myself, it was great. It works really well. So it's available in Bedrock now, which is great, which hopefully means that QDev will be able to use it soon, and I'll get to use slightly updated models, which is nice. I still don't like the term intelligence. I don't like that. I know they're artificial intelligence. I don't like that term. Capability is what I'd go with. They are more capable, more intelligent. That just feels iffy to me. But if you look at the naming convention is still terrible. It's still the USB consortium all over again. You'd have thought they'd have learned the rationalized on 4, and now we're on 4.5 Sonnet. Okay, this all over again. Cool. But if you look at the table, what you can see is it's a marginal improvement over Sonnet 4, which is what you'd expect. And it's kind of trading blows with Opus 4.1, which is interesting because for the uninitiated, Claude have 3 submodels, and each of those have their own versions. But you've got Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus, where Haiku being the cheapest and Opus being the most expensive, and Sonnet kind of being the middle child. And Sonnet was the one that got lots of subversions of that because it had 3.5 V1 and V2, and then 3.7, and then 4, and now 4.5. And Sonnet seems to be the one that gets lots of attention because it gets just lots of updates. And it seems to be trading blows with Opus 4.1, which is interesting, actually. It's better in some areas. It's not quite as good in others. The agentic coding stuff and the terminal coding I'm quite interested in because 4.5 is nearly 15% better in terminal coding than 4. So that's quite cool. So yeah, it's good. New models are good. Running them in Bedrock is good. Hopefully it'll come out of Bedrock and come to QDev at some point and I can use it there.
Well, let's watch your space again. There's lots of space.
Isn't that a turn up
watching
for the
going on
books? I was the
there.
ultimate AI skeptic. Literally, I
Yeah.
hated it, and now I'm all over it. So
Because you got given a coin, and it just seems to
given,
have completely changed
I
your... Oh, sorry,
won.
you won a
I
coin.
won.
Now you love it. Yeah. So there we go. We know how to win John's attention. Swag. We've said it before, and we'll say it again. It's all
Shiny
about
things.
swag. Yeah. Anyway, on that note, let's move on to our next article for this week. Is sticking with the subject of AI. There was an announcement last week that the AWS Knowledge MCP server is now generally available. And I think, Luis, this kind of ties in a little bit to the use case that you described of automating remediations, etc., within AWS using AI. The Knowledge MCP server allows LLMs to talk to all of AWS's knowledge, I guess, the documentation and knowledge bases and so on and so forth. So what are your thoughts on this one, Luis?
I think this one is like those quiet launches that could be a game changing for AI reliability, because I think that sometimes these models or these AIs like hallucinate, and they create methods that doesn't exist. As I mentioned before, I've been working with this service AWS Media Tailor. I was in charge of creating like a programming list of programs, and there were some things that I didn't know, so I have to look for on internet, and I start to work with ChatGPT, and ChatGPT create a lot of methods that doesn't exist. And when I said to him, "Hey, you are doing it wrong," no, this is the correct answer, and it also sent me the links from the documentation of AWS, and his method doesn't exist, the URLs doesn't exist. So I think that with this, maybe the data we will rely more on the data, and we will work better with them, because I can say to him, what's the current syntax for creating a VPC endpoint, and it will give me the correct answer and maybe the correct link, not from the memory or from what the things that it invent. So I think it could be a huge win for automations, DevOps copilots, or maybe to create more tools with AWS. But I think that AWS is moving toward to create a trusted LLM ecosystem, donde all the knowledge is verified, versioned, and maybe safe to work with them, and don't waste a lot of hours like myself, that I wasted around 4 or 5 hours to learn this call from this service.
John, your thoughts?
I mean, I picked this because you threw it at me the other day and went, "Yeah, you should have done this." So I picked it just to kind of chat about that, because there's the MCP for knowledge, which has come out recently, and there's another one for the API as well, which has come out recently, which we have another article about that, and we might put that in the show notes as well. But it's basically just another service announcement, so I probably wouldn't bother. I like these sorts of things because it's very much, as Louis says, it's a great way of helping it not hallucinate, because that's a big thing. I've had this with ChatGPT. It's just invented things from Terraform that just don't exist. Here's how you do it. You're wrong. No, I'm right. Provide its own link back to it. Go read that again. You're wrong. Oh, yeah, I am wrong. So that's just immensely frustrating. And it's the sort of thing that makes me think that an AI is not going to take my job away, because the only reason that I know that is I've kind of done it the hard way already. But it's absolutely the sort of thing that's going to trip a junior engineer up. And again, I had this in spite of my enthusiastic espousing of what I've been doing earlier today with my kind of semi-vibe coding, as it were, guided coding, whatever you want to call it, where it was, oh, I do it like this. No, that's not quite right, because this is definitely wrong. The doc's telling me it's this. Oh, okay, I'll fix it. Makes it worse. No, that's worse. Okay, and then you finally kind of get there. Being able to hook MCPs in, basically, for the uninitiated, I had this described to me a little while ago by Warren Perad, I think, on the podcast when we had that terrible time with your internet, Carl. An MCP is like an API doc for an AI. Effectively, it's here's how you talk to this thing. Cool. And if you can tell QDev or Claude Code or Cursor or whatever, here's how you talk to the AWS documentation, because I use that quite a lot and you need to be able to go and reference it. Great. I'd like to think QDev wouldn't necessarily need to be told about it because it is Amazon's own tool. So maybe it doesn't need to be told that. But if you're using something else, like, I don't know, Kiro, maybe, which is using Claude models, but not necessarily via Q because it's VS Code fork, you can give it MCP servers and that works quite nicely. So this is probably quite a good addition to that. And then between this and the API MCP server, I really need to put my teeth back in today. You could give it both of those and it should be able to spit out some really nice stuff for you in terms of like serverless workflows or whatever, because here's how you talk to the APIs in Python, here's how you use Bot03, here's how you hang that all together using SAM, and here's the documentation. Brilliant. Love that so much. So I like this. I like that it's free, which is good. I like that it doesn't need an AWS account, which is also good, because that's one of the big issues with some of these tools, not the MCP so much, but with things like your code assistants, is you have to sign into them somewhere so that they can kind of track usage and what have you. So I like this. I like that it's not costing you anything. I like that there's no account, but there are rate limits, as you'd kind of expect. So if you use MCP servers, here's another one.
Well, I have to say that was possibly the most acronyms I've heard in a single sentence for quite some time. API,
I didn't even say A to A.
Yeah, you could have thrown that one in as well, just to seal the deal. But yeah, no, good to know that AWS are releasing things to help us get more accurate results when we're trying to figure out how to do things on AWS. So on that note, let's move along to our final article for this week, which is an article from the Register, not one of their most exciting headlines ever, but the article, I'll just read the article title: Subpoena Tracking Platform Blames Outage on AWS Social Engineering Attack. Software maker Codex said its domain registrar fell for a fraudulent legal order. So I read this article and I thought it was a little bit unfair for them to be blaming it on AWS. It just so happened that the domain was registered on AWS. But what did you think, John?
I think it was on Reg and I picked it and I haven't read it. I like an Reg article because you don't have to read it. The whole thing is in like the first two lines. So AWS isn't actually a registrar as it happens. So they don't do their own registrations. They use Gandhi or someone like that, which is a funny old name. But so they're not the registrar, right? They farm it out to somebody else because they're not registered with the relevant people to do that or some such. But yeah, anything that's fraudulent legal orders, anything that's social engineering, I don't think you can blame the platform. It's the users, because you were the one that got conned, mate. There's no £1 million waiting for you to send 1,000 to verify your bank account. That's not happening. And it's these sorts of things have been going on for a very long time. We just have funny names for them now. But it is what it is. Threat actors, nothing was transferred, no credentials were compromised, no customer details were accessed. Codex was never breached. Threat actors don't have access to anything. Storm in a teacup.
What were your thoughts on this one, Luis? Think it's fair to blame AWS?
No, I don't think it's fair to blame AWS because this was a human vulnerability. It wasn't a technical exploit. It wasn't a SQL injection, cross-site scripting. There was any of those attacks. It was that someone was manipulation, and someone convinced AWS to take down this domain through paperwork. So even if your infrastructure is perfect, if your domain can be frozen, you are offline. So I think that they should, maybe AWS will need to tighten its verification policies after this, because maybe I can, for example, the domain, logical data, I can do some crazy things and I will take down your domain and your services will be down. So AWS maybe should tighten these verification policies, because imagine if someone did this to a hospital, a bank, or maybe a national service, it will be a very bad publicity for them. So that reminds us that security is different from encryption. It also is about human process and verification. So in this year, attackers don't need to hack your servers. They just need to hack your trust chain.
Absolutely. Humans are often, unfortunately, the weakest link in these things, and which is why a lot of these fraudsters focus on social engineering rather than the actual kind of technical engineering ways to make these issues occur. But anything to add, John?
No, I don't think there's anything else. I think it's someone like Codex. Given who they're used by, are just going to be a target. And, it's one of those, you've seen this before where people with, what do they call them? Politically exposed persons. I remember that from my anti-money laundering training and various other anti-bribery and corruption training from when I used to work for a bank, who had a history of that. I'm not going to say who they were, but they're not allowed to dispute the record. And it was a term of deferred prosecution. And if you look up bank and deferred prosecution, you'll work out who I used to work for. But people like politically exposed persons and large corporates like this that are going to be targets of these things. You've seen this before where you are not allowed to take money out of my account unless I come and do it in person. It's one of those, it's not a voice verification or a face verification, not going to be good enough, particularly in the modern era with AI where you can reasonably accurately fake someone's voice. No, that's not allowed. You have to have either the special secure password that I've shared with you ahead of time, and banks are good at that sort of thing, or I have to come and do it in person. And I appreciate you can't necessarily do that with this, but it's just more checks are going to be needed for these sorts of firms because of what the company builds. But yeah, whether they'll get, tighter controls in place for everybody or not remains to be seen. Sorry, watch this space.
Well, I do wonder about the irony that's highlighted at the end of the article, though, that I'll just read the paragraph. It says, somewhat ironically, the social engineering attack that led to this outage came mere hours after Codex issued a warning about law enforcement agencies and local government that also had their domains compromised. I'm wondering if this person saw that and thought,
I'm
coming for you. Yeah. You've gone publicly out there warning people. I'm going to do the same to you just to prove how easy this is. Yeah, a little bit of scandal there, as is often the case with LReg articles. But on that note, we have reached the end of our time this week for season 4, episode 38 of Logicast. So I'd just like to thank you, John, for shifting left and sharing your insights with us as always. And Luis, great to have you back on the podcast as your second year in the Community Builder program. We'd love to have you back on again next year once you've renewed into your third year of the Community Builder program. So thank you very much for joining us again and sharing your insights. So that is all we have time for season 4, episode 38. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please give us a like, a recommendation, tell your friends. We are available to download from wherever you download your podcasts. And if you'd like to see John's background looking almost identical to what it did last week, I can't tell the difference. Check us out on our YouTube channel where maybe you can spot the difference. I used to love those when I was a kid, spot the difference. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, see you again next time.
See you.